The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today, and welcome to the Alliance's annual federal budget briefing. I'm Jamie Coleman, and I do federal advocacy work with the National Alliance to End Homelessness. I'll be joined today by other Alliance staff, including Julie Klein, our Policy Outreach Associate, Steve Berg, Vice President for Programs and Policy, Kate Seif, our Program and Policy Analyst, Sharon McDonald, Director for Families and Youth, Mindy Mitchell, Program and Policy Analyst, and Jamie Day, a Program and Policy Analyst as well. In this webinar, we're going to talk about the President's fiscal year, commonly abbreviated FY 2016 budget request, which was released this past Monday. Before we delve into the content of the budget, I'd like to point out, in case you would prefer to follow along throughout the webinar using a printed version of the webinar slides, you can access them by following the link on our President's FY 2016 budget briefing page, which is right up on the screen there. In addition to the slides, you can also find a number of other helpful materials, including a list of the Alliance's 2015 policy priorities, an FY 2016 budget chart and rundown, a link to our FY 2016 homelessness funding campaign, a federal policy brief, and a company talking points, and more on this page. If you would like to receive updates after the webinar, make sure you sign up for our campaign list. You'll have the opportunity to do so later. Please note that all of the lines will be muted during this briefing, but if you have any questions at any point, you can send them to us through the webinar software. To do so, you'll find a box labeled Questions in the webinar panel at the right side of your screen that you can type your questions into, and we'll go over them at the end. We'll hopefully have enough time at the end of the briefing to answer as many questions as possible. If you're having technical difficulties during the webinar, I would recommend calling in by phone instead of using your computer speakers. If there are any additional issues, please quit and restart the webinar. The purpose of today's briefing is to learn what's in the new budget proposal, how it impacts affordable housing and homelessness, and how we can use this as the foundation to work together to advance some key issues this year. Julie is going to start things off by providing a brief overview of the federal budget and appropriations process. Next, my colleagues will give a rundown of the President's FY 2016 budget proposal for key departments and programs. Steve will then discuss the budget and policy outlook for this year. And then Julie will wrap things up by explaining how you can get involved in preventing and ending homelessness through our FY 2016 homelessness funding campaign. And finally, we'll go through and answer as many of your questions as we can. As you can see, we have quite a lot to get through in just an hour, so please bear with us. We promise to budget time in for questions at the end, and we'll get to as many as we can. Okay, now I'm going to pass this over to my colleague Julie Klein, who will give us an overview of the federal budget and appropriations process.
Great, thank you so much, Jamie. So as Jamie said, today I'm going to start off talking about the federal budget process and providing some background information on the President's budget proposal and where this fits in. Then I'm going to be going into some details on this year's budget proposal along with my colleagues from the Alliance's policy team. The President's budget proposal was released this past Monday, February 2nd, on time this year for the first time in recent years. And the President's budget proposal typically marks the start of the federal budget and appropriations process for the fiscal year and kicks off the rest of the process. The budget request is for fiscal year 2016 this year, and this will begin on October 1st, 2015 and run until September 30th, 2016. The President's budget, which is officially released by the White House's Office of Management and Budget, reflects the administration's funding priorities for the upcoming fiscal year. It is not law, but is rather meant to guide the House and Senate as they make decisions about their proposed budgets and funding levels for programs during the appropriations process. I'm going to quickly explain how the President's budget proposal relates to the rest of the appropriations process so that you have a better idea of the process and the next steps, and then I'll speak more about the role the President's budget plays in just a few minutes. Following the release of the President's budget, the House and Senate Budget Committees typically hold hearings to examine the administration's request, and then this in turn guides them each in drafting a budget resolution, and these set the total amounts that the Appropriations Committees will have available to spend. Note that like the President's budget proposal, budget resolutions are not law but simply guidelines to work within. So the House, Senate, and President's budgets all set guidelines and visions for what they want funded and to what extent. The full House and Senate are supposed to finalize a concurrent budget resolution by April 15th, although this varies significantly year to year. So after the Budget Committees release the budget resolutions, the full Appropriations Committee takes the full amount available to spend that's set out by the budget resolution and divides it up by allocating funds to each of the 12 appropriations subcommittees, and each of these are charged with deciding on the funding levels for certain federal agencies like the Department of Housing and Development and the Department of Transportation. And then once the subcommittees get their allocations from the full committee, they then each provide funding levels for specific programs by writing and passing appropriations bills. So for example, the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Appropriations Subcommittee is charged with funding programs including the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Grant, Section 8, and other federal housing programs. It's divided in such a way and down to such a specific level because it's impossible for everyone and anyone on the Appropriations Committee to have a solid grasp of all of the programs in the federal budget. So splitting the full committee into subcommittees allows members to focus on a specific group of programs over which they have jurisdiction. Before the funding levels become law, the appropriations bills must be passed not just by the appropriations subcommittees, but also the full appropriations committees and by each chamber of Congress, and then signed into law by the President. So this chart shows the simplified federal funding process from the release of the President's budget proposal to determining the final federal funding levels for programs. So to recap and looking at the chart, the President's budget is released in February. Next, the Budget Committees release a budget resolution, which the Appropriations Committees use to divide funds to the subcommittees who write and pass appropriations bills funding specific departments and programs. And then these bills are finally passed through Congress and signed into law by the President. So this looks very nice. It's kind of the government textbook version. But unfortunately, in recent years, things have not run this simply or smoothly. First off, although typically the budget resolutions passed by the House and Senate lay out the overall spending level for the federal government, this is actually already done this year since those amounts were set by funding caps put into place through the Budget Control Act that passed in August of 2011. So the Appropriations Committee, they're expected to divvy up funding to the subcommittees working under those levels. Also, in such a partisan political environment, it's been difficult to get bills through the regular appropriations process of going through the relevant subcommittee and then the full Appropriations Committee and full chamber, and then being reconciled through conferencing the two bills. So in recent years, this process has halted partway through, and the federal government has relied on broader budget deals and large omnibus appropriations packages to come to agreements on funding levels and keep the government running. That's why it's so important this year for advocates to be paying attention not only to influencing the appropriations process, but also to what's going on in the broader budget context, since this will determine both when is the best time to engage in federal advocacy and also how much funding will be available for non-defense discretionary programs. And that's the slice of the federal funding pie that homeless assistance and affordable housing programs fit into in FY 2016. So Steve is going to be talking more about the current big budget picture outlook later on, so be sure to pay close attention at that point. So now just to return to the role of the President's budget proposal again, it is not law, but rather a guide. Congress ultimately makes the decisions about what goes into the bills, and since we now have a Republican majority in both chambers, the President's budget proposal can be viewed kind of as a wish list of everything the administration would want to fund in their ideal scenario, which is really far from the current budgetary and political reality. In this tough budget environment, there are many, many interests vying for members' support for their priorities. And this is why it's so critical that advocates strongly make the case to their members of Congress that investments and initiatives included in this budget proposal for the purpose of ending homelessness are worth funding. So this is why you are so critical to the appropriations process. senators and representatives really are relying on all of you for information about funding for homelessness and housing programs, and they're more likely to push for funding increases when they understand the direct impact the funding has on real programs and people in their districts. So the President's budget kicks off the start of the federal funding process, and we really appreciate the past dedication to such efforts from our local partners, and we hope to continue and expand all the excellent work from our field as we move into the FY 2016 funding cycle. It is certainly worth repeating that we can't impact funding levels for key homelessness and affordable housing programs without the help of advocates across the country, all pitching in to make a strong collective impact. So thank you all again. And now I'm going to hand this over to Steve to share what we think of this budget overall and provide broad strokes introduction to what's in the administration's proposal.
All right, thanks, Julie, and thank you for everyone who's joined the call today. As Julie said, we've had a certain amount of success over the last several years keeping this issue on the agenda in Congress and getting some decent funding. We couldn't do that unless there was a large group of people not only doing great work with the money that gets spent, but also letting the decision makers know that this is important. This budget is really a budget that's worth fighting for. When you look at what's in it, the substance of it, there's strong funding proposals for specific targeted programs for housing for homeless people. There are strong proposals for broader anti-poverty measures, measures that will help people get jobs, measures that will ensure that we get to where we want to be with the various goals and opening doors. We'll go over a lot of the specifics of that, but just some examples are within the Homeless Assistance Grants Program, which of course is the largest targeted homelessness program. There's a $345 million increase in funding for that program, which would be one of the largest increase in recent years. There's also a proposal to increase the Section 8 program to do 67,000 new housing vouchers to make up for the cuts that took place a few years ago. And those are really targeted toward hard-to-serve populations, including people who are homeless. This budget proposal comes in a context where there's going to be big fights about the broader budget. This proposal assumes that caps on spending that are in the law right now will be removed. There is a lot of reason to believe that there's going to be serious negotiations between the Congress and the White House about removing those caps, and that leaves a lot of questions about how much they'll be increased by, what the payoff will be, what else will be cut in order to make up for that. It's going to be a very complicated year in terms of budget, but the important thing for us is we need to make the point early, often, and over again that spending on programs for homelessness bring about good results and results worth getting. So let's dive into some of the details now. The first thing we're going to do is turn it back over to Julie to talk about the HUD programs in the budget.
Thanks, Steve. So now we're going to go into a bit more detail on important things in the budget that relate to key homelessness, affordable housing, and low-income programs. We unfortunately don't have time to go through all of the programs relevant to your work, but we've pulled out some of the key ones to give you a snapshot. I also want to note that as we go through these programs, if you go to our President's FY 2016 budget briefing page, which Jamie mentioned previously, you'll find a link on. You could find a link to this page on the right side of our website, and you can find a budget chart and rundown that includes funding levels and brief analysis of what's in the budget proposal for all the programs that we're going to be speaking about over the next portion of this webinar and many more. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes walking you through a few HUD programs in the proposal that are important to ending homelessness. The first, as you might have guessed, is the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Grants Program. The President's budget proposes to provide $2.480 billion for homeless assistance. As Steve mentioned, this represents a $345 million increase. That's about over 16% over the enacted FY 2015 funding level. And this investment is a tremendous show of support and really speaks to the great work you're all doing in your communities. This $2.480 billion would again include at least $250 million for the Emergency Solutions Grants, or ESG program, which would allow communities to continue to expand their rapid rehousing efforts, as well as address other emergency needs, including shelter, street outreach, homelessness prevention, and services. It would also include at least $2.223 billion for the Continuum of Care programs, which would meet the renewal demands and also do some other really exciting things. So it would create 25,500 units of permanent supportive housing to get us much closer to ending chronic homelessness. And it would also fund 15,000 rapid rehousing interventions for families. So we're really excited about this proposal. The President's budget also, again, proposes making permanent language that would allow nonprofits to administer rental assistance under the Continuum of Care. Another very exciting proposal is $21.1 billion for tenant-based rental assistance, also known as the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program. And in addition to covering contract renewals and providing increases to administrative fees and tenant protection vouchers and renewing mainstream vouchers, the budget, as Steve mentioned, also provides funding for 67,000 new vouchers, which would be enough to restore those lost as a result of sequestration cuts in FY 2013. 30,000 of these 67,000 new vouchers would be targeted to vulnerable populations. So of those 30,000, 22,500 would be targeted to families, veterans, and tribal communities experiencing homelessness, as well as victims of domestic violence. And 5,000 would be targeted to victims of domestic violence specifically as well. And then 2,500 would be for the Family Unification Program vouchers, which would ease children's transition from foster care to independence, as well as assist families who have children in foster care primarily due to a lack of safe and adequate housing. So that covers, the 30,000 targeted to vulnerable populations vouchers. The remaining 37,000 of these new vouchers, they wouldn't be specifically targeted to vulnerable populations, but the proposal explains that they would be distributed to PHAs based on relative need. Finally, this proposal also expands the Moving to Work program, which gives PHAs a lot of flexibility with their housing dollars for activities such as rapid rehousing, to include 15 more high-capacity PHAs. And then it also proposes to extend the maximum term of the Family Unification Program vouchers issued to youth aging out of foster care from 18 months to 5 years. The budget also proposes a significant $1 billion increase to project-based rental assistance, which would allow over 1.2 million households utilizing the program to stay in their existing housing. And it also proposes over a $100 million increase for the Public Housing Capital Fund and a $160 million increase for the Public Housing Operating Fund. So that's just a rundown of some HUD programs. I'm going to turn this over to Kate now to dive into the rundown of what the budget proposes for key veterans programs. But just remember, you can find further information on other HUD programs and programs in other departments by checking out our budget rundown and chart on the President's Budget Briefing page on our website. And also remember, you can type questions into the questions box whenever you get a chance throughout the webinar, and we'll get to them at the end.
Thank you, Julie. This is Kate Seif. I'm a Program and Policy Analyst on Veteran Homelessness with the Alliance. And as Julie said, I'm going to be talking to you about the homeless assistance programs within the Department of Veterans Affairs. So just to jump right in, the President's budget proposal proposed $1.4 billion for the sort of group of homeless assistance programs within VA targeted towards veterans, which represents flat funding from last year, from fiscal year 2015. However, the amount for the individual programs has changed, so I'll get into that, the individual levels, in just a moment. So I just wanted to remind everyone, just a happy, fun reminder, that we are seeing big declines in veteran homelessness. And the chart on your screen right now sort of shows actual and projected. It's, of course, important to note that the 2015 and 2016 numbers are not actual. We don't have those yet. You guys all just did your PIT counts last week. So these are sort of our projected based on how things are going. That 2016 number should actually be 12,500, which I think it just got cut off and reverted to 10,000, but that's okay. which is the functional zero level of veteran homelessness that VA is aiming for in January 2016. So the budget reflects this, that we've seen declines, great things are happening, and we expect to have fewer homeless veterans in the upcoming years. Here's the breakdown. Supportive Services for Veteran Families, that's the Rapid Rehousing and Prevention Program, received $300 million, which represents flat funding from FY 2015. The Grant and Per Diem program, the President proposed $201 million for the program, which would actually be a slight cut. Well, it would be a cut. Last year in FY 2015, the program was funded at $252 million. So we're seeing a decline in that program. But HUD-BASH case management would receive $374 million, which is a pretty big increase from $321 million last year. So more money for HUD-BASH, the case management portion. Important to note, again, that there are no new HUD-BASH vouchers in this budget. They're not allocated. However, there is funding in that tenant-based rental assistance account to maintain the existing, I believe, 78,000 vouchers that are already in existence. So no vouchers are going away. There just won't be more vouchers added. So that's the breakdown. So in terms of the changes that are made within those three programs, again, not really. Unfortunately, Secretary McDonald didn't call me this year and consult with me, so I don't quite know why there are those specific changes, particularly with Grant and Per Diem, but it's something that we'll be, of course, monitoring and looking into quite a bit. You'll also note that this doesn't quite add up to $1.4 billion. If you can do basic math, you know that doesn't add up to $1.4 billion. So the reason is that these are three programs within that 1.4. They're the big programs focused on serving homeless veterans, but that 1.4 also includes numerous Department of Veterans Affairs medical services, other case management, and lots of other things that go on with the Veterans Health Administration that sort of support these programs. So they all get under this 1.4 umbrella, so just so you're aware. A quick note about advanced appropriations for Veterans Affairs. This is a little bit confusing, and I don't want to get into it too much, but VA, in order to protect it from sort of budget battles and all the craziness that can happen with the budget process, actually gets funding 2 years at a time. So every time Congress passes a budget for the year, it will include the current fiscal year for Veterans Affairs and the next year for Veterans Affairs. So they get 2 years at a time. So the second year's funding, so last year, FY 2016 funding was allocated, but it just kind of sort of sits in the proverbial bank and doesn't get used. But it's there in case anything happens and a budget doesn't get passed. It's ready to go. So Congress can make any changes they want. So when the upcoming fiscal year, like, well, that money was allocated, but let's change it around. Let's change some of the funding amounts. And the President can every year make adjustments, can request adjustments in his budget proposal, which he normally does. So this year was actually interesting for FY 16 advanced appropriations. SSVF actually received more funding and GPD received more funding. So that money is technically sitting in the bank ready for them to go, but the President requested less for each of those programs than was already allocated. Big part of that, again, I don't have a lot of insight into the process specifically. A big part of that is that we just expect to see fewer homeless veterans. Going back to that chart, we're seeing big declines. So the funding will not decline all the way, but will definitely go down, and we think that is what the President is doing when he sort of makes those minor changes. So I just wanted to make a quick note about that. It's a little confusing, so if you have any questions, please feel free to enter them into the box, and I will do my best to address them. The important thing, though, again, is that this budget request is just a guide. It's a request. It's not law. So it could be that Congress ultimately decides to keep those advanced numbers and change them altogether or go in a different direction. So we'll see as the process sort of unfurls. And finally, on the veteran side, within the Department of Labor, there is a small homeless veteran training and employment program called the Homeless Veterans Reintegration Program. Again, the President proposed $38 million for that program. It has stayed steady at $38 million many years in a row now. So with that, that's veterans. If you have any questions, please do ask. And I will turn it over to Sharon McDonald, who will talk about our families. Sharon?
Thanks, Kate. Thanks for everybody for joining us today. So I'm just going to hit a couple of the high points on vulnerable families, low-income families, and children programs. I think maybe the biggest news is significant investments in child care and child development programs. There is a proposed increase of $1.5 billion to Head Start. One of the goals of that increase is to make that program a full-day program and a year-round program. There's a $366 million increase to the Child Care Development Block Grant Program, which would bring funding to that program to $2.8 billion, which provides child care to working and low-income families. A $100 million proposal for a new program, a Working Families Pilot, to test effective ways of delivering child care to working families. And finally, a proposal in the Department of Education to make universal access to preschool for children from low and moderate income families. So clearly a commitment to serving young children, particularly low-income children. There's also increases to the domestic violence programs, a $15 million increase to the Family Violence Prevention and Services Program, which provides services and shelter, emergency shelter for survivors of domestic violence, with a particular note in the budget that this is in response to the challenges survivors often find in finding emergency shelter. There is a significant, perhaps a tripling of the resources for a domestic violence hotline, and a level funding of $25 million to the Department of Justice Transitional Housing Program. The Transitional Housing Program in the Department of Justice is used slightly differently than we use it in the HUD world. It provides flexible rent assistance and supportive services to survivors to help them reaccess housing. The Promoting Safe and Stable Families is a program that provides services, intensive services, to help reunify and reconnect or preserve families who are child welfare involved. So there is a significant request for funds in their discretionary account. So there's mandatory money and there's discretionary money. So it would increase by $30 million, with that increase being targeted specifically for increasing resources in rural and tribal lands. The Community Service Block Grant Program is a program that provides a whole wide range of services to low-income people, and often in low-income communities. It proposes level funding this year at $674 million. This is notable. It's the first time in recent years that I've seen where the proposal wasn't to cut the program in half, actually. And the budget notes that they've seen increases in performance improvement, and they plan to continue to seek improvement in how those funds are used for making an impact in reducing poverty. So that's an indication of faith that there's that money is making a real difference at the local level. Finally, something that's intriguing is a legislative proposal included in the budget to commit $573 million of a mandatory program. So the TANF, the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, is a block grant program to provide a range of services to low-income families with children. The contingency fund is a pot of resources that gets tapped when economic conditions require it to be, increased demand or eligibility for services. So the proposal is to, which would have to get approval from Congress, would be to take some of that money and make it available for subsidized employment for low-income families and youth, which would be a great thing and something that we would support. So that's it for the highlights on the families, and I will turn it over to Mindy to talk about homeless youth.
Thanks, Sharon. And again, I'm Mindy Mitchell. I'm a program and policy analyst here at the Alliance, and I focus on homeless youth. I'll just briefly be covering the programs within the budget that assist homeless or at-risk youth. So to start off, we're pleased to see that there are proposed increases for most programs that serve homeless or at-risk youth, particularly those that help them access education and employment. So as you can see, the budget proposes increased funding for 2 of the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act programs for FY 2016. There's $54 million for basic center programs, which represents a $1 million increase over FY 2015, and $50 million for the transitional living programs, which is a $7 million increase over FY 2015. And $1 million of that increase for TLPs will be used to expand supportive services for LGBTQ youth. However, the street outreach grants, the education grants to reduce sexual abuse, have basically been flat funded, still at around $17 million. The RHY budget also proposes $2 million to implement the statutorily mandated incidence and prevalence study of unaccompanied homeless youth. And finally, the budget also proposes an increase to $72 million for the McKinney-Vento Education of Homeless Children and Youth program, which is through the Department of Education, and that represents a $7 million increase over FY 2015. This year's budget also proposes increased funding for several employment programs that target at-risk youth. There is $873 million proposed for youth activities under the revamped Workforce Investment and Opportunity Act, or WIOA. And that requires that 75% of those activities be focused on out-of-school youth with barriers to employment, and homelessness is specifically one of those barriers. And this also represents an increase of $42 million over fiscal year 2015. We also have in this proposed budget $84 million for the Youth Build program, which also targets at-risk high school dropouts, and that's a $5 million increase over FY 2015. And finally, for Department of Labor programs, it's $1.715 billion for Job Corps, and that represents a $27 million increase. And finally, within ACF at the Department of Health and Human Services, the budget requests a substantial increase to $9 million to help combat domestic trafficking. And of course, homeless youth who are on the street are very vulnerable to exploitation by sex and labor traffickers. So we're pleased to see that additional $6 million requested to expand and improve the grant programs that are available for domestic victims of trafficking. So that covers most of the basic budget areas that are important for homeless youth, and I'll continue to monitor all these programs throughout the budget process and keep you all updated as we learn more. Thank you again for joining us on the webinar and for all the vital work you all are doing for the homeless people in your communities every day. And now I will pass it along to Jamie Day.
Hi everyone, this is Jamie Day and I'm a Program and Policy Analyst here at the Alliance, and I focus on chronic homelessness and homelessness among non-chronic adults. And I will be covering health programs for the fiscal year 16 budget. So to begin with, the Department of Health and Human Services also funds a number of programs that fund healthcare services for the most vulnerable and those living in supportive housing. The administration's budget for fiscal year 16 overall maintains level funding for these programs. So under the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA, programs specifically targeting homeless persons include the PATH program, which would receive $65 million, which is level funding. Other programs include grants for the benefit of homeless individuals, cooperative agreements for the benefit of homeless individuals, and treatment systems for homeless, which would receive a combined $74 million. Again, these programs target homeless persons specifically and those with severe mental illness and substance use disorders, and they provide outreach, treatment, and supportive services. In addition, there are 2 block grant programs that target the most vulnerable. These are programs that support state-funded behavioral health efforts and can provide some gap-filling funds for those that do not receive Medicaid. Mental health would receive $462 million. This is plus this is with $21 million for an evaluation project and would total $483 million. And substance abuse would receive $1.8 billion. Turning to other HHS programs funded under the Health Resources and Services Administration, community health centers provide primary care for persons regardless of their ability to pay, and the administration proposes $4.2 billion for these centers. This is a 9% decrease from fiscal year 15, but is still much higher than the fiscal year 14 levels. The administration also proposes that of those $4.2 billion, $2.7 billion be made mandatory over the next 3 years to total $8.1 billion. And this extends the mandatory spending, which expires this year. Of the $4.2 billion, 8.7% of these funds are directed towards healthcare for the homeless centers specifically, which total $365 million. This is all just a slight decrease than what's been seen in the past. And HRSA also funds Ryan White HIV/AIDS programs, and there's a slight increase of $4 million proposed to total $2.323 billion. And finally, federal spending will continue to implement key parts of the Affordable Care Act. This includes Medicaid expansion, and this is really the big news in terms of health care coverage. Medicaid expansion means that all persons below 138% of the federal poverty line are eligible for coverage. 28 states so far have opted into this, and since the health care exchange opened in October 2013, there have been about 10 million more people with coverage, which means better access to health care for vulnerable homeless people, particularly in places that have opted to expand. So that's all from me, and I'll turn it over to Steve.
All right, thanks everybody. So that is a basic rundown on what is in the budget, and I think, you know, rising above the particular details of it, I think the big picture here is this is a very positive budget for people who are trying to end homelessness in their communities. As I said before, however, the budget makes certain assumptions about the big budget environment that that things will have to change in the big budget environment to make this happen. And I'm going to spend a few minutes just talking about what those things are. So right now, as people have been following this over the last couple of years know, there's a cap on overall discretionary spending. And discretionary spending means the kind of spending that Congress decides year by year for a large number of federal programs, including essentially all the HUD programs, and most of the other programs we're talking about are in the discretionary spending bucket. So there's a cap on discretionary spending right now. The President's budget proposal, it proposes spending more than the cap. So in order to do this, the cap's got to be raised, and the cap can only be raised by Congress. So people will look at Congress, and after the last election, a lot of the people coming to Congress were people who talked about spending less in federal dollars, not more. So how can we think the caps are going to be raised? It turns out that there is a lot of support in Congress for raising the caps. The caps are what's a lot of people are talking about as the sequestration caps. I'm sure I never used the word sequestration before 4 years ago, but that's now the common way people are talking about this. And the sequestration caps, there's caps on the domestic programs, but there's also caps on defense spending. And the defense industry, the people who make weapons, the people who are concerned with the defense of the United States, feel that the caps are way too tight, that they need the caps raised too. So there's a lot of different people who are allied in this idea that the caps need to be raised. In order to raise the caps, however, there's going to have to be some offsetting measures to make up for the budget savings that the caps are making right now. And that will just create there will be a lot of fights and a lot of disagreement, but many people in Washington who deal with these big budget issues feel there's a very good chance that there will be serious negotiation between Congress and the White House to overhaul the whole budget, partly to raise these discretionary spending caps. That process could go a whole number of different ways. It could be good, it could be very bad, but there is definitely a fairly good chance that some sort of major changes will take effect. what we can do, what we feel we can do as people who know about homelessness but aren't necessarily experts in this whole range of federal programs, is we can continue to talk about what we need to do in our communities about homelessness as an example of why we need to raise these discretionary caps. That's something we have to start talking about now, repeatedly, over and over again, in conjunction with any allies we can come up with. It'll have an impact on the big budget issues, and then it will also have an impact on the specific budget issues about these specific programs. At some point, Congress, besides making these big budget issues, will have to make a decision, how much are we going to spend on HUD homeless programs this year? That decision, final decision, unlikely to be made until the fall or later. But waiting till the fall is a very bad idea to start talking about this, because things will get locked in. The people who make these decisions will get sort of set in their mind an idea of what they need to do and what they don't need to do. And if they start hearing about how many homeless people there are in a community, how effective the programs can be, how important it is for their constituents that homelessness be addressed, and how the federal spending will result in good things happening in the homelessness field. The more they hear that, the earlier they hear that, the more they'll get it locked in their head. Yet, yes, if we have any opportunity to do something, if the caps get raised, this has got to be a top priority. And just to end with sort of a sober reminder, too, just because there's a lot of incentive to make a big budget deal, it doesn't necessarily have to happen. It could be that if both sides are too dug into their respective positions, we won't get a big budget deal, and we'll be stuck with these caps. And in that situation, the caps for 2016, they're on paper about the same as for 2015, but for a number of different reasons. If the caps don't get raised, spending is going to be cut. Overall HUD spending would be cut, and we'll end up suddenly finding that we need to defend the homeless programs from being downsized. And the work we do now to make sure members of Congress know that these programs are important, to make sure people in the press reporting on these issues know that these programs are important. The more we do now, the better chance, in whatever the end results of the big budget fights are, the better homeless programs will be. So that's my final sort of rah-rah for people to get involved. I mean, I would just remind what I say every year, and it every year proves to be even truer. The people on this call, the people in this network, the people who work on homelessness around the country, when we're talking about funding for these programs, we have a big advantage, which is that you all, working at the local level, do fantastic work with these programs. It's not every pot of money that Congress has where they spend it and good things happen, like a problem we thought was intractable now appears to be, wow, we can actually solve this problem. Congress doesn't get to solve a lot of problems. I think what we're seeing with what's happening with veterans, where you put the money on the table and results happen that everyone can cheer about, that's the kind of message that people are going to need to hear over and over again. It's something we really have working in our favor, and we need to use it in every way we can. So with that, let me turn it back over to Julie, and she's going to talk a little bit about how specifically you can get involved in helping bring about these results this year.
Great. Thanks so much, Steve. So there are plenty of opportunities to get involved with advocacy in 2015. A large component of our work at the Alliance is to work with our partners across the country to impact federal policy priorities around preventing and ending homelessness. And we send out many updates and work with communities across the country to help make their advocacy efforts easier. As we just heard from Steve, it's particularly important to make sure that we all work together this year to educate Congress on affordable housing and homelessness programs and push them to prioritize them. Over the last several years, Congress and the administration have really shown that they place a really great value on the collective work to end homelessness that you've all been doing, and we need to work with Congress to ensure that this prioritization continues this year despite the tough budgetary climate. So how can you get involved? There are a lot of ways year-round that you can get involved in addition to more specific, time-specific opportunities. So in terms of year-round opportunities, you can prioritize your work by thinking, at that moment, what sort of impact you can have. When you're thinking about advocacy, you can ask yourself, does your senator or representative sit on committees that are working on these issues? Have they supported something similar in the past? Is the issue likely to advance this year? So those are just some questions you can always be asking to figure out how to be the most productive with your advocacy. And then, as I discussed earlier, the federal budget process can be quite messy, so the best way to stay up to date on current opportunities to get involved in federal advocacy is to sign up for updates and alerts, and we'll keep you in the loop about the best ways and times to take action to influence decision making. So you can sign up for Advocacy Update. This is an opportunity, it's a newsletter that provides up-to-date information about a range of issues Congress is considering. And for more specific details, if you want to get more involved, you can sign up for our Homelessness Funding Working Group. And this group, this year, it's going to kind of replace what many of you have previously known as our McKinney Working Group. And you'll get regular updates about what's happening in DC and how various proposals would affect programs serving people experiencing homelessness, as well as opportunities to get involved in these issues. I'm going to launch a poll in just a few minutes that will give you the opportunity to sign up for this list. So we're going to be doing a lot of work on a wide range of federal policy issues over the course of 2015, and a complete list of the Alliance's 2015 policy priorities is available on our website. But I just want to spend a few minutes doing a quick overview of some of the particularly high priority issues that we will be focusing on this year. So we will be doing a lot of work to secure that $2.480 billion for the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Grants Program in order to increase our capacity to end chronic homelessness by the end of 2017 and expand rapid rehousing in order to get us closer to the goal of ending family and youth homelessness by 2020. So that is going to be, a really big push of ours. Another thing, we're also going to be working to secure Section 8 vouchers targeted towards people experiencing homelessness. So we're going to have that ask as well. And finally, we're going to be working with our national partners here and hopefully with all of you to make a really strong case that HUD needs more funding, highlighting examples of what increased funding would mean for making progress in ending homelessness. So that should just give you kind of a sense of our priorities going forward this year. As you might have already noticed, we've already kind of soft launched our FY 2016 homelessness funding campaign, but we'll have more specific, concrete opportunities for involvement soon as things start to pick up, likely in early March. For now, we've created a specific website for this campaign. You can see it on your screen there if you want to check it out. And it will be kept up to date with the latest news, key resources, and a quick summary of what advocacy action is needed at the moment, including helpful tools like sample letters or talking points as helpful. And we'll be conducting a number of different advocacy, mini campaigns, time-specifically throughout the year. So there will be opportunities to get involved through meeting with your members of Congress for, example, through our Capitol Hill Day or in the DC office, in their DC offices or district offices. There's also opportunities to host your members for site visits of your homeless assistance programs. And there'll also be, various call-in weeks or letter writing campaigns for key opportunities for you to collectively call or send letters to your congressional offices. So we'd really love your help this year, and we hope you will join us in this important effort to really advocate and give a voice to the most vulnerable members of our society. So right now, we are going to give you an opportunity to do that. We are launching a poll where you can sign up for our homelessness funding working group. And if you have already been on our McKinney email list, you're already signed up. So don't worry about this, even though there's, the name change. It's the same list. But if you're not involved, it would be great if you could right now just indicate that you would like to be signed up, and we will get you on the list. This, again, will just give you some alerts about what's currently going on in DC and the best times to take action on issues important to ending homelessness. So we'll give you a minute or two to fill that out. So thank you again for your interest, and we look forward to working with you. And then if you're not sure, but if you change your mind later or you have any questions about joining, you can email me at jklein@naeh.org, and that contact information will be at the end of the slideshow as well. And we really look forward to working with those who get involved throughout this year. So please don't hesitate to be in touch if we can be helpful in any way. And we'd also love to grow our base of advocates participating in this campaign to send really, just as strong of a message as possible that ending homelessness is important to members' constituents and needs to be a priority. So, in addition to signing up, it would be great if you could also please spread the word about this email list with your partners and colleagues as well. Okay, so I thank you all for signing up. I think we can shut that poll now. So just to kind of wrap up, advocacy is becoming increasingly important in our efforts to prevent and end homelessness. And together, this field, a lot of the people on this call really laid the groundwork for FY 2016 advocacy efforts with a really strong letter rating campaign push in December. And this week's news also demonstrates the value the administration places on your efforts to prevent and end homelessness. And we really want to live up to that expectation and build on it by educating Congress on how important and successful that work really is. So working together, we're really optimistic that this year we'll be able to defend our programs from spending cuts, which, as Steve mentioned, is going to be a really important and difficult effort this year. And we are optimistic as well about making progress in ending homelessness. And we really look forward to working with you on all of these critical efforts. So thank you all for all of your help in past years and going forward this year. We really could not do this work without you and appreciate your time spent on these efforts. And with that, I'm going to hand this back over to Jamie to facilitate a Q&A period.
Great, thanks, Julie. As a reminder, we will be sending out PowerPoint slides and other materials from this website.
Thanks, Jamie. So in FY 2015, at least $250 million was provided for ESG, and that was in the final FY 2015 enacted bill, and that is the same amount proposed in the FY 2016 budget proposal. So at least $250 million of the total homeless assistance spending amount is to be allocated for ESG. And then it's also might be worthwhile to note that, and I know I had gone through this section of it quickly before, so remember the Continuum of Care program also will fund 15,000 new rapid rehousing interventions as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Our second question will be for Steve. In regards to increasing caps in places where entire delegations are already on board, what can advocates do, or what should they be asking of their Congress members who are already supportive of these increases? And then piggybacking on that, what are the chances of this requested funding level actually being enacted?
All right, so we're setting odds here. For one thing, if you're in a place where the delegation is already very much in favor on the big budget issues, it still helps to let them know that you're in favor of it. Members of Congress are not. This will work if members of Congress are not only in favor of it in a general way, but are actively fighting and making it a high priority. So the more they hear, people are already on your side, enjoy hearing thanks that you're on their side. So that's still an important thing to help motivate people to make it an even higher priority. It's hard to put an exact number. This year harder than any because there's so much uncertainty on the big budget picture about whether these increases can get enacted. I think there's, it's a decent chance that we'll have something like what happened in 2014, where the Murray-Ryan budget agreement lifted the sequestration cap for that year, and the result was we got you know, at least 25 communities just found out that they got substantial awards for new housing for chronic homelessness. I think we could do even better this year, but I also have to say that there is the worst case scenario is much worse.